Want to advertise your business in a cost-effective way? It's time to give podcast advertising a try. Research shows a high rate of podcast listeners made a purchase as a result of an ad they heard on a podcast. Visit podbean.com/brands to launch a cost-effective podcast advertising campaign in minutes. That's podbean.com/brands.
Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, where we foster confessional integrity, liturgical preservation, and preaching that doesn't stink. We believe that the historic liturgy of the divine service is more than mere cobwebs of antiquity, but it is a true treasure of the Church, to be dusted off and brought down from her attic to be enjoyed. So let's get dusting. Welcome back to the Gottesdienst crowd. This is Jason Braaten, your host. Today we have back with us Adam Koontz. He is the A professor at Concordia Theological Seminary. Welcome back, Adam.
Hey, good to be with you.
So last time we were talking about heroes, what our heroes should be. And I think you were discussing finding what you can actually do and talk about and do that. And you were saying, I can't talk about engineering, or I can't, talk about this, but I can give advice on how to corral and wrangle toddlers for family devotions.
Apparently I just asserted that and, refused to elaborate. So there we are.
Yeah. So we got a comment say, I know that your podcast wasn't on this, but don't leave us hanging. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Not specifically wrangling toddlers, but really kind of family piety, family devotions, kind of what's at the core, and then what are things that can be added or taken away depending on circumstance or time or things like that. So where do you want to start?
I think there are at least two things that are involved in wrangling toddlers for family devotions. And one is the nature of wrangling, which also applies to the, maybe insolent behavior of older children, or at least their sullenness about family group activities at various times of life, or when interrupting their plans, all kinds of things here. And that is so apart from, and before you start thinking about, how much of the Brotherhood prayer book are you going to be using with your toddler? You need to figure out what would maybe generically be called discipline. And this is an area where I find that a lot of people are very reluctant to discipline their children such that, and I don't think that means that they're necessarily nicer than the rest of us, but such that when they do discipline, they end up being very, very harsh, or having to be harsh if they discipline at all, because of the inability for the child to understand what the rules are, what the expectations are. So all of this really starts in the parent's own grasp of what their expectations are for a given child at a given time of life. And that applies to every situation, including family piety. So this is where I think that, like a lot of other things in life, the exercise of piety is going to be connected to other general senses that the child either has or is given, like politeness, or a sense of, I can't do everything that I want whenever I want. And those kinds of things are reinforced by, not chewing with your mouth open, saying please and thank you, closing the door when you leave, go out the front of the house. All these kinds of things.
Those kinds of things are really wanting, actually, because I'm a pastor in a congregation and I have a youth group, and I can't tell you how many times I have to say, you should really do that with your mouth closed.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny, but it's kind of not funny, because it's an index of a decline in little things that that index tracks much larger things, right? So if you can't be faithful in a little, how shall you handle much? So if you can't chew with your mouth closed, then how am I going to inculcate to you that you need to bow from the waist at this particular time during the liturgy? All of that makes sense if you have a general sense of propriety that doesn't even have to be discussed. So also when we're talking about this, what we're also talking about is we're trying to, most of us, create some kind of actual cultural reality in our families and in our congregations that is probably not inherited anymore. That is to say, it is historic, but it's not really in the strict sense of this word, traditional, right? Yeah. This hasn't been handed over. So it's how foreign. To do that, it is. Yeah, that's right. And so it's kind of like thinking like, okay, well, how many of these manners can I teach at any one time? Well, I start, the baby is he's getting his top teeth here at the Koontz home. So, he's not yet expected to chew with his mouth closed. But the 3-year-old is, and we expect a lot more of the 11-year-old. So whatever the age, you're always looking for something, but you have to be realistic about that. But I think all of this starts with a concept of discipline and politeness and self-control being inculcated. Yeah. And if that's there, then the rest of it, the other practical things that we could talk about today, would I think, fall into place.
I think that's a great point. One of the things that my parents and then even my in-laws have kind of always said is something like, as a parent, it really comes down to like the every minute decisions that you make with your kids. Like it's not just like necessarily the big things, but all the kind of normal daily in and out stuff that you deal with. If you aren't dealing with it, those things kind of compound and add up in a really huge way. And some of that civility thing you're talking about, the not mismanners, but just being a human and recognizing that not everyone else wants to see you chew your food or like hear the ice crunch or of course I'm kind of a little, noise sensitive. So I think I've passed this on to my children.
That's okay. This is a noise sensitive recording here today because I think it's just part of being polite. So totally fine with your paranoia. I think I share it.
Yeah. So if I hear any kind of chewing, I'm like, really? Do you have to do that loud? Do you have to gulp that really?
So, it is a sense of what to do, and a sense that when you are with other people, you cannot do whatever you want, which is to a greater or lesser degree with different displays of willfulness, the default setting of a child. I mean, he knows about his and his will and his desires. Yeah, very naturally. You don't have to inculcate that. My children seem to know that in spades, all of them naturally. Yeah. Yeah, they know it. So anything else is going to be training. And if I know that, then I don't have to think of family devotions as this enormous, this is sort of like people's private prayer lives or their Bible reading. I find that generally people just have guilty confessions about it. They don't have a lot positive to say. They feel like they should be doing more. They know they're not doing enough. They skip it easily, etc. It's all kind of the same problems. If you start to think of it on a continuum with something else in your life, it's probably easier to change. So if you start thinking, okay, well, right now I have a 3-year-old and I have a 6-month-old. Well, let's save Brotherhood Prayer Book Vespers for later, maybe next year. And this year we can read a Bible story and pray, and that can be enough. I mean, setting realistic expectations and then holding to them applies for discipline as well as for devotions.
No, I think that's a great point. Just in terms of finding a skeleton that you can add things on as things grow, right? Kind of naturally,
right?
And so what role, in terms of like just Bible reading, and maybe just recitation of Ten Commandments, Creed, Lord's Prayer, that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
then what role in music? What kind of music?
Okay. So my kids do recitation in the morning, which involves the Ten Commandments, the Creed, the Lord's Prayer, other prayers, maybe like the collect for that week. And that's all on a sheet that we take home from church. So that's very simple. In the evening, it is a little more discursive, and we'll do some simple prayer, Luther's evening prayer, or the Lord's Prayer, sometimes a psalm, which I'll just read. And then we read a chapter of the Bible. So this started, all of this is more developed than it used to be. And because when the kids were all smaller, my oldest is 11, when the kids were all smaller, everything was smaller. It was a Bible story out of some kind of, 100 Bible stories or something like that, something usually with an illustration, and maybe the Lord's Prayer. They sing usually a hymn either for the week or some kind of seasonal hymn. And that's, the morning thing is more involved because it's our homeschool opening. So that's a lot more involved than I would recommend people get, certainly to start. Now, I know other people that use liturgical forms, Vespers, Matins, Compline, except for Compline, none of those originates in in the family setting. And the issue there is simply that, let's say that you have 4 kids and 3 of them are boys. It's going to be harder to get those boys to stop fidgeting to do all of Matins. Let's say you're trying to sing the whole thing. So you have to adjust, I think, also based on sex. I mean, I think if we have 7 kids, I think if the first 3 had been like girls right in a row, we would have had a more ornate setup earlier because the girls would have sat still very compliantly for it. We had a boy who likes to be outside at all times first. So things were just very simple to start. Now, I think that what is interesting about this is that the more children there are, we have 4 boys, 3 girls, is the littler ones, more is actually being expected of them than was true for their older siblings. But they're also meeting those expectations because the older ones normalize things for the younger ones. So this is kind of, I mean, what you mentioned earlier about the little things, the sad thing, that's the kind of wisdom that you often don't have with your first child.
You don't. Or you don't understand it.
Right. But you need with your first child, because you will make your life a lot easier if you just set something realistic and then enforce it, make sure that it happens early on. And then the older ones will actually do that by force of example for the younger ones.
I usually get questions like this just in the parish, like, so how do I start? What do I do? And I usually just say there's lots of resources out there. You can use those, but here's my suggestion. Just say the invocation, the creed, and the Lord's Prayer, and then have a short Bible reading, maybe a psalm, or, just pick a book of the Bible and pick a paragraph and just start. And then stick with that. And as you get kind of in the habit of doing it, you can add on, because you can always add on. But if you make it too difficult, you'll think you always have to do the most difficult thing. And then you, as you said, you just won't do it.
Right. Yeah. And that would actually be worse.
Exactly. It's better to be done than not done.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And so I think, probably there's too much complication because complexity is associated with piety. There's also a tendency maybe to want to do too much at the same time because you are overloaded by information about how this or that is a crucial part of our Lutheran heritage or whatever. And it might all be true. And it might even be true that people were bringing, hymn books with no musical notation, and they knew the tunes, and there were only so many tunes, and they knew all those and everything. And that's true, but you have to think about the lack of clutter, both physical and mental, in their lives that enables that to be durable, right? So if you want people who, troops really on both sides of the First World War are able to sing hymns in the trenches from memory, you have to limit the amount of stuff that a person has to deal with. So if your kids know, 10 hymns by memory at the end of 2 years of trying or something, which kids are kind of intellectually better at everything than we are.
Yes.
So they'll do better than that. But if that's all they know, then, that's 10 that they didn't know 2 years earlier. So whatever it is that you're trying to inculcate, children are very adaptable. The challenge really is not the children. If the children think it's normal that they need to sit still for 5 minutes and that's enforced, then they will. It may take longer or shorter, but I've done it. It can happen. And so what we're really talking about is really normalizing things for ourselves. So if it feels normal to stare blankly at your phone with other people in the room, then this could also be normal. You just have to do it. Yeah.
Stare blankly. Okay. So I want to go on that in terms of expectation. On the one hand, you've said kind of set an expectation of that this is normal. How do our kind of unrealistic expectations wreak havoc on setting just the good expectation of we're going to sit down and have prayers and that this is normal? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I think unrealistic expectation is not recognizing something that historically is very clear, which is that let's say prayer life, or you could say liturgical life. Liturgical life does not look the same in a country church as it does in a city church, as it does in a community that would be entirely male, like historically universities or monasteries, as it does in a family. So families are not expected historically to necessarily reflect the liturgical life of their parish. I'm talking even in a very, cozy, probably some of the listeners wish they lived in 17th century Scandinavia or something, types of places with a Christian monarchy and stuff like that. And that's all fine. I'm just saying that the family did not live the same life, maybe even if you had, let's say, morning and evening prayers in the parish church. So levels of complexity will generally increase as the devotion of the group solely to the work of prayer increases, right? Which would be greatest in, say, a cathedral or monastic setting. So acceptance of some kind of basic simplicity, and then recognition that if you just have a small catechism, you actually have forms of prayer already laid out for you. And that if you started there with those morning and evening prayers, and then let's say that you got really ornate and you prayed after you ate, okay, which is a very wholesome custom, but very rarely seen. And I mean, I don't do it myself because I guess I'm too important or something, right? Who knows, right? I have really
the
important
returning
stuff
thanks.
I don't have time to do that. I mean, I got to go on to the next thing. I mean, it's all absurd when you say it aloud. Yeah, I have to go answer some very important emails or something, people have questions about everything, So, even if you just did what's in the small catechism, your life would be immensely enriched, rather immediately. And you don't even have to, you could just start with maybe when you go to bed or, doing the evening prayer at the time when you're all together at a meal or whatever the case may be. All of this requires scheduling and assumption that if I'm going to make something normal, I have to just act like it matters until I actually feel that it matters. And I think part of the unrealistic expectation is that surge of sincerity you get when you hear a new idea.
Right.
and then you try it, and
work.
and then the sincerity kind of wears off, and maybe you become cynical or whatever, or guilty, or I don't know what, but you really need to start taking your own sincerity less seriously. You just need to recognize that certain things have to happen, and you just need to do them.
Yeah, so that your feelings follow your actions in that regard.
Right, they do. They absolutely do. And I mean, if this is observably true, like, the reason that I like when a congregation is using the common service is because I don't have to think about what is happening like next in church in some sort of way that somebody who's in like his second dance class has to think about it. Right. Like it's much better for it to feel natural, to be natural. And then my devotion can focus on other things in the service, because I'm not thinking about, as it were, where my feet go. In the same way, you don't need to do things in a way that feels really important or really liturgical or Lutheran or whatever adjective it is that you are, seeking out for life right now. You need to just do things that have been proven to be worthwhile and solid. And if you keep doing them, then you'll get stronger, and you can do more if you so desire and as you need. I mean, we read, last night we read a chapter and a half. We read a lot of the Bible every single year in the evenings. And that I didn't realize I was going to end up doing that. But I suppose if I wanted to just completely abandon reading the Bible at any other time in any other form, I would still read a large amount of the Bible just with my kids every year. And that happened because we realized that we could, and it was good, and it was more coherent if we read a little bit more than we had been reading. And the older kids were sick of Bible stories, such as they are. So, yeah.
Well, that's kind of where we've come to. We started with like going through Bible histories, and yet my older kids they know the Sunday school material inside and out. And so they came to me once and said, "Hey, Dad, you think we can do something else? Can we start reading through other stuff?" Because I feel like, so they're homeschooled, but they have a co-op, and there aren't any really any other Lutherans there. And so are all the Baptists and Reformed, and they know parts of the Bible really, really well that then my boys don't know. And they're like, "Oh my goodness, we gotta beef up. We gotta represent."
Right. Yeah.
So I said, "Well, you can read it on your own too." But yeah, so we started going through, books of the Bible or Proverbs. We spent a lot of time in Proverbs, and the questions they get, or, I'll set some time to say, okay, define this word. Like, he keeps using this word based on what we've read. How should we define this? Or how should we understand it? And I think some parents are afraid of kind of engaging that. And when you get to, if you're doing the Bible histories, you can just do the who did this, when was it, what was going on, just particularly for younger kids. And that can really kind of occupy their time. And it doesn't take a whole lot of knowledge because you just read it. And the text is right in front of you.
Right.
So how much of, fear of getting to the point where they don't know something keeps people from doing that? And then how do you overcome that fear?
Yeah. The fear of saying something wrong is so crippling, both for passing on the faith as well as sharing the faith. Right. So this impedes both how we relate to our own children, and then also how we evangelize or don't evangelize unbelievers, because we're very afraid, I'm not entirely clear on all of the logic for this, but we're very afraid of saying something wrong, as if every unbeliever is going to have a detailed question about, the causes of election, like people generally don't. And, so, 98% of questions from your children, certainly as they grow, you will be able to field. You know more than you think you do because you've been listening. Mm-hmm. You just haven't had to. The challenge in teaching is usually not that you've never thought of something before. It's that you've never thought of it in a way, either the way it was asked, or you've never thought of it enough to explain it to somebody else. So there's a learning curve for parents, but that's part of being a parent generally, right?
You have to explain things that you've always known how to do and break that down into steps.
Right. And so if you find yourself, saying the Bible equivalent of like, you have to pull your pants down first, in order to, you'd never thought you'd have to explain that involved in a simple process, but that's fine. Like that's, kids are confused about everything, and that's okay. We love them for it. So I think that the fear of getting it wrong needs to be recognized as just a fear. It's just an impulse, right? You're not going to turn into a heretic magically one night when your child is, asking you what happened to Lazarus after Jesus raised him from the dead. Like, right. Is he still walking? These kinds of, some kid is gonna, has figured that out somewhere in America today and will ask his parents that. That's okay. And the other thing that you're doing by talking about the Bible with your children is that you're telling your children that this is a normal thing that people do. In the same way that many of us grew up with it's being normal, certainly for men, to talk in detail about the athletic performance of people they've never met at sports they themselves don't play, right? Like that's normal, right? Like that's totally normal. Is that you would have, and I always found this very
we know
odd.
We know their war and we know their whip. And
yeah. Right. They know all that, right? Even, so that's, okay, that's fine. But, if you're a Christian, you want your children to have at least the same investment in Christ and the Bible that lots of people do in, Major League Baseball teams. So you have to provide them with everyday ways to do that. And talking about the Bible, even at the risk of having to tell your child to his face that you don't know something, is, I think, just about the best way to do that.
No, I think you're right. And there are times when pastors have to do this, where they have to say, I don't know. I have to look that up.
Right. Yeah.
That's happened to me a number of times. Not every week, thankfully, but
generally not in the middle of the sermon.
Yeah, no, they don't talk during that time. At least not to me.
But yeah, I think if you're not called to omniscience, right? The pastor is not called to omniscience. The professor is not called, God forbid, to omniscience. The parent is not called to omniscience. That's not actually your job. You are teaching, and in teaching, there is an enormous amount of either forced or realized humility, because it is an experience of everything you don't know. That's even when it looks to them like you know everything, if you actually know something, will realize what you don't know, even as you're explaining something that to, this 6-year-old appears to be a comprehensive explanation. So, honesty will actually induce humility, and that's a good thing, because you don't need to know everything in order to convey the faith. That's just not in the Bible. Like you don't have to get there.
Yeah. So general discipline is kind of where we begin on this, and then, normalizing the fact that we're going to set aside a time and perhaps a place for doing this holy activity,
right?
And then just doing it. Picking something, sticking with it following through day in and day out, keeping it simple to a certain extent. What are some of the I don't want to say hacks, but that's how our culture would refer to it. Like, so what are some of the helpful reminders in terms of setting aside not just a time, but a place? And so often you hear about like a family altar or things like that. Mm-hmm. Does that help in distinguishing this time from other times? And how can it be put to good use in kind of corralling the kids?
Yeah, the family altar seems to have been metaphorical for a very long time. I even apart from whether it has existed even metaphorically, but it seems to have been metaphorical for a long time. The exceptions would be, probably, I mean, today there are probably more literal home altars than there have been, maybe ever in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod's history. Right. Which I think is totally fine, right? I think that the place where you are being clean is important. I mean, we always clean up before we do what we still call Bible stories, even though it's not quite Bible stories anymore. We always clean up. But if you do have an actual altar, then you would want to put, I would put art that has some precedent either in your congregation's sanctuary, some resemblance in style or something. I mean, if there are too many little Lutherans who go to, like a vaguely Gothic, maybe Thorvaldsen Jesus on the altar sanctuary, that's the Jesus that the Mormons co-opted, because they share some Scandinavian heritage with the Lutherans, the Thorvaldsen Jesus. And then, maybe there's a painting or something. It might even be, horror of horrors, Jesus knocking on a door. Mm-hmm. And then the little Lutheran comes home and suddenly it's, 16th century. Well, Cranach would be closer, but the little Lutheran comes home and it's like 16th century Novgorod at the home altar. So I mean, I think our consistency of artistic style can be helpful in order to connect the home church with the church, with the congregational church. If you're going to have a physical altar, like a space set aside, and pictures are good for kids. Candles are good for kids. I mean, we have candles on the dinner table partly for that reason. Mm-hmm. Every night is a candlelit dinner. It conveys something special about the time and the place. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things are all helpful. I think that if discipline is lacking, none of it is really helpful. It's just extra stuff that the parents have to worry about. I mean, so if your child is used to not obeying you or being talked to like he's just kind of a mildly unreasonable adult or something, then all of this is going to be hellish. So don't add any more stuff for yourself to do. If your children have some modicum of discipline and you don't have to like stress about every family situation, then adding art and music and candles and other things like that can be that much more beautiful and helpful. Something that a Lutheran culture did, of which I'm also aware is not an altar, but it was called a Bible nook. And these would be built kind of above in the corner, sort of a corner cupboard. And family Bibles and hymnals would be stored in there and then brought out at the dinner table. So that's,
Yeah, we kind of have that. We don't always, that's kind of where it happens in our homeschool opening. And I'm not always there for that because it happens usually probably about 8:00 or 8:30 and I'm, kind of heading out the door. Right. But for our evening prayers, it's usually in the living room, kind of our main room with the big couch so we can all be on it together. Right. Yeah. Though, I'm thinking of, instituting that everyone needs to kneel because they just keep pestering each other. You get the I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. But
Right.
But Mom, he's almost touching me. That kind of thing.
Yeah,
So you do
right.
get some of that.
Yeah,
And
if you give them all something to do, then that can be immensely helpful.
Yeah. One last thing about kind of prayers. I think, maybe starting out, you can, obviously you've mentioned, Luther's evening prayer, Lord's Prayer, and then say the collect of the week that you get from church. I think there are a lot of people who kind of get really uncomfortable with just ex corde, praying from the heart, praying for family members. Any suggestions to them on just kind of how to start doing that is very, I don't want to say low expectation, but very easy to do. Like, Lord, I lift up my mom, have mercy on her, or something like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Use words familiar to you from the liturgy. And again, I think a lot of that fear is driven by the fear of saying something wrong, which like, look, I don't think you're going to do when you're asking that grandma recover comfortably from her surgery. Like that's, and I mean, like, there's something maybe deep behind this, like, a lack of understanding perhaps of God's kindliness or his gentleness with his children. Yes. Yeah. Fatherly goodness and mercy. That he is not waiting for you to, he's not like some sort of horrendous bureaucrat, or oppositional lawyer waiting for you to slip up so he can just get you on that mistake you made. He's
not like an ecclesiastical vending machine that you have to put in the right words at the right time for the thing to get spit out at you.
Right. So I think if you're going, adding ex corde prayer from the heart is very simple. You can start with liturgical formulae that So we pray for so and so who this is going on with or whatever. You can even do this on the anniversary of a death significant to the family. We thank you for, grandma, whoever, for her life in Christ. All of those examples can be carried directly out of the prayer of the church in the Sunday assembly. You don't need to come up with something totally new. I would say that not only the more that you're in church, but also, especially the more that you read the Bible, the more confident you will be in praying without having something written out beforehand. Right.
Yeah.
And that's true for pastors as well as for people, that the better that you know the Bible, the more that you know of God's, mind and heart, because you know his revelation through in Holy Scripture. And so you can feel confident that you are asking something which is, altogether good and fitting. And, whatever is lacking in your prayers, you also have Christ's intercession for you. So that you can pray confidently, right? He's not looking to, strike you down as soon as you slip up and say something that could be misunderstood by someone with evil intentions, assuming that person is listening to your family devotions.
Yeah. Some of the things that I've encountered kind of in wrapping up is not growing up seeing this done, and so not knowing how to do it then. And as you said, the fear of messing up, I think those are really quite common. Perhaps, just a way of kind of looking at it is, the fear of doing it wrong. If you're not doing it, you're doing it wrong. And if you're doing it, you're doing something right. So maybe just start to think of it, in terms of a mind hack, because some of this is psychological, where we just kind of, as you said, work ourselves up into a frenzy of just freezing and not doing anything. And that is not who our Father in heaven is, right? He's not somebody that's just going to zap us. Any kind of final thought to wrap up in terms of advice to either new parents or parents who are just slogging through it and trying to struggle that you can give to them?
Yeah. For new parents, I mean, the advice is that you don't know what you're doing, and that's okay. None of us does. So at any given age, your oldest child is an experiment. Unfortunately for him or her, that's so, you what you want to do is realize that there are certain basic patterns of life for, as we talked about earlier, discipline generally, for family devotion specifically, that will be salutary, that you don't have to come up with. Okay. So they may not have been handed down to you personally, but they do exist, and they are quite simple. And Christians have used them for ever and ever and ever. And so you can too, with confidence, that any wisdom that is lacking, the Heavenly Father will delight to supply to you, right? He is open-handed and generous. That is his way of being a father. So this is something in which you can be utterly confident. For everybody slogging through, which is on one day or another, it's extremely gray and cold today in Fort Wayne. So I'm more slogging than skipping through life today, just by virtue of the cloud cover.
Yeah. So that's most days there.
That's most days there. For everybody slogging through, this is the nature of life, is putting one foot in front of the other. So the fact that you don't feel like doing it tonight, or that you skipped devotions for the past 2 nights because you were so busy and you all came home late, that doesn't prevent you from doing it today, right? I mean, we don't do this with things that we are nagged to death by people to do, such as, most dentists recommend, flossing twice a day, brushing twice a day. We don't neglect these things that have to do with the care of the body, or if we do, we at least feel guilty about it. Why would you neglect something that cares for your soul and is way more refreshing for the spirit than anything else that you could be doing? Because what it's probably going to be replaced with, if you're not doing it, is something that if you step back, just have a pretend out of body experience for a second and look at yourself slouched over your phone as your kids are, screaming in their bedrooms because you finally put them to bed and you're just tired, or you're going to watch something on Netflix. Like, is that really a life worth living? No, it's not. I mean, we've all done it at one time or another, but it's really not worth living. So why not try something that when you look back on those 5 minutes that it's going to take to pray a little bit and read a little bit of God's eternal word given to you in Holy Scripture, you're going to be like, that was good. That was great. I mean, I can do 6 minutes tomorrow, or I can just do 5. And, but it's all good and it's all positive. And I think this is something I think we talked about before we started recording. Like, there is a way of looking at doing the right thing that would really be salutary, which I did not learn from the Lutherans. Unfortunately, I learned it from sports, which is you don't have to do everything perfectly. And I don't know why more Lutherans don't think about life this way based on our doctrine of justification. If my standing with God is completely, utterly perfect because of what Jesus Christ has done, then I don't need to do things perfectly and obsess over how I didn't do them perfectly. I can do them more or less imperfectly with attention to this or that detail, gradually improving over time, because it doesn't matter. I don't know. I don't need, Jason Braaten to walk into my home, one night at like 7:30 and be like, this is the perfect family devotion. He's gotten it right. My standing is not secured by my or anyone else's sense of whether I am doing something perfectly. I'm just doing it because it's good.
No, that's a great thing. That's a great advice. I think actually, our people have been conditioned to think that way, because I think I've heard enough sermons that kind of go that route. Like, oh, you do all these things, but you don't do them perfectly because we know you didn't want to do them.
I know. And I don't know why we beat down people for doing the right thing, but doing it somewhat poorly at times. I mean, like, Paul Paul doesn't do, I mean, when we see Paul, Peter, apostles writing to congregations, they don't say, well, you're praying, but you're not doing it right, are you? You terrible little, miserable worm. They encourage them in doing the right things. Yeah. I mean, our pastors should try to talk the way the Bible does to Christians.
Yeah. That's right. I think another thing that is helpful, at least that I've found helpful, is this. Whenever I want to do something that goes contrary to my conscience, like I know that I should do this, but I just am like feeling lazy or something. Someone told me this a long time ago. They just said, say it out loud. Like, say it out loud, right? I'm going to go down a wormhole in YouTube instead of reading the Bible. Just say it out loud, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I'm going to skip my workout today because, I would rather go and, have a donut. Or I really deserve this donut today because I worked out yesterday. Yeah, that's silly. Or, just saying it out loud. Sometimes you just need to, and I usually laugh, right? When I say it out loud, it's like, man, I cannot believe that I thought that sounded smart, because it sounds smart, but it's not.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I think that's the verbal counterpart to the, stepping back and visualizing yourself doing what you're doing, So instead of, doing X good thing, I'm going to spend the next 18 minutes, looking at people who I really don't like very much, on social media, complaining about things that I don't care about. And that's how I'm going to spend these next 18 minutes,
Yeah. And then get really mad about it.
Yeah. And then that is going to affect my life and also my spirits. So yeah, I think because the danger too is that the flight out of things like family devotions is generally into some sort of private, if not vice, at least a kind of nascent vice, sloth, cynicism, rage, that's going to be induced by electronics. I mean, because we're not skipping family. Yeah.
It's kind of like the all things are lawful, not all things are profitable.
Right.
Thing that you find in 1 Corinthians. There's nothing really wrong with you watching YouTube, but really, is this really profitable? I mean, I think you can get to a point where there is something wrong. So I'm not saying, it's completely lawful, but, on the face of it, so I like to woodwork, and when I'm feeling really not like doing anything else, I will find woodworking videos to give me ideas. And sometimes it's like actual ideas, but sometimes I'm actually running away from doing something that I should probably do. Right.
Yeah.
But so at that point, it's not only not lawful, not beneficial, but it's not lawful when it comes to that point. But there is a sense when we should step back and ask ourselves, is this really profitable? Is it building up? Is it building me or those around me up?
Yeah, because I when you're doing things that either are nascently wrong or very obviously wrong, they work in the same organic fashion that good things do, right? So the more energetic I am, the more I achieve. The more I achieve. The less energetic I am in discipline generally, or devotions specifically, the less effort that I put into it, even if I don't feel like it, the less I will do. And that will multiply in a way similar to, fruit being born. I mean, I think it is significant that when our Lord talks about goodness, he talks about it in organic ways, right? Trees and their fruit. And conversely, bad trees and their fruit. And so when you're looking at what you're doing, you have to look at it sort of like somebody that is trying to clear a bunch of underbrush. If you try to do it all on the same woodlot on the same day, it's not going to happen. So you need to do a little bit right now, and then come back later because it has grown. But if you cut back a certain amount, then that's not going to be there for a while. Maybe you cut it off, you burned it off, and now you're working on a little bit more. And you have to just accept that it exists organically in your life, and so can only be treated gradually. I think people are accustomed, maybe by technology, maybe by other factors, to thinking about change in their lives as if it really is a matter of an on-off switch.
Yeah. Or it's something that you can set and then forget about.
Right.
Instead of thinking of more of like whack-a-mole or doing the laundry or buying groceries, like these are things that they happen every week and you're not getting rid of it.
Right.
It's a constant thing. As soon as you get one down, the next one pops up. Did we miss anything?
I think
probably. We're not perfect.
No, right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that we may have missed, when and how do you add things on? I mean, I made a little bit of reference to, the sexes and how girls will generally be more outwardly compliant, full stop, in life. There's usually a greater emotional complexity and endurance of emotion in girls that has to be attended to, but they will generally be more outwardly compliant. Also in the church service. Now that, again, all of this depends on discipline, but boys will be more fidgety. For boys, more physical activity is probably good. So you may actually want something that is more physically demanding, such as we're going to kneel. At these times, we're going to cross ourselves. It's not that that's going to be bad for girls. It may prove to be that much more helpful for boys. So those kinds of things, depending on the ages of one's children, can be immensely useful. Because the more that the boy's attention is engaged also on a physical level, probably the better for him. Sometimes I will also have the boys read aloud so that they can learn to do that. Those kinds of things, you want to train them for the roles that they're going to have one day in their own families, where hopefully eventually the things that we're doing in our families are not only historic practices, but they're also traditional. And therefore feel natural and normal. Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time, Adam.
My pleasure.
Greet everyone at the seminary for me, and we'll see what kind of comments we get that we can turn into another episode.
That sounds good.
All right, take care.
Take care.